Antifa in mainstream media and Twitter. This is part 3. See the first 2 links below for parts 1 and 2 if you need to. Here we go. Not that Jared Holt of Right Wing Watch, a blatant propaganda outlet, is a reliable source, but for what it's worth, of interest here, he would later write in right-wing publications lauder an anti-journalist smear campaign for Columbia Journalism Review. An anti-journalist smear campaign. It's not anti-journalism at all. So he writes, Lenihan tells CJR via email that his methodology consists of labeling Twitter users as quote-unquote highly connected to Antifa if they had quote 8 or more connections unquote on Twitter to either accounts run by anti-fascist activists or one lecturer at Dartmouth. He also said he has provided quote-unquote snippets of his work to journalists to support his claims. Quote, those who received them were asked not to make them public as peer review demands exclusivity on publishing said data. Unquote. He told CJR, quote, who received that information is obviously confidential, unquote. Lenihan did not specify which peer-reviewed journal was considering his work for publication. Quote, the network graphs as they've been presented appeared to show a network of Twitter follows, so from that we can only really say that journalists who report on the far right follow anti-fascist accounts, which often publish the given names of far-right activists and other material useful to reporters seeking interviews on Twitter, which is not really a groundbreaking revelation. Sure, but notice that they ignore the fact that Lenihan did say that they do understand that to follow Antifa accounts doesn't necessarily mean that you support them. He addressed that. Way to go, schmuck. Indeed, folks, this whole piece by Holt relies heavily on ignoring what Lenihan actually wrote. Here's an example. Holt also writes that Lenihan, quote, identified himself as an online extremism researcher despite having no association with any previously known organization that researches extremism, unquote, despite, the Daily Caller would later claim, the email that Lenihan apparently sent to Holt in which he wrote, quote, alongside my doctorate, I have been investigating left and right extremism. Okay, he said left and right extremism. He told Holt that. He told Jared Holt that, left and right extremism, since 2016. In 2016, I was hired by a left-leaning charity to create a set of curriculum documents for educators that present interventions for those at risk of drifting into online far-right extremism. Okay, far-right extremism, there you go. He's combating both. At the moment, I am involved with a research center into far-right extremism, and I am designing a platform for the curriculum documents. I also study the far left, Antifa specifically. This Daily Caller reporter would also write, as for the charge that Lenihan is quote-unquote far-right, it is an accusation that Lenihan disputes, and one that he told Holt he disputes. The only evidence cited by Holt is a vague reference to Lenihan getting banned from Twitter for violating its terms, and the fact that a Nazi publication approved and circulated his findings. They're talking about the Daily Stormer. You know, a bad person likes this thing, therefore this thing must be bad. Hitler likes dogs, therefore dogs are bad. Whatever. We will return to that article a little bit later. Later that day, Human Events published this by their managing editor Ian Miles Chung. Twitter bans analysts who revealed Antifa connections with journalists. Twitter banned a researcher dedicated to mapping out Antifa's connections to journalists and the SPLC. Former teacher and analyst Lenihan has been banned from Twitter after revealing major links between so-called quote-unquote anti-extremism campaigners and the hard-left Antifa group. Further down it says Lenihan was suspended early Wednesday morning, prompting speculation about the ban. Andy No, a Wall Street Journal contributor and editor at Quillette, alleges that Lenihan was suspended following mass reports by members of Antifa on Twitter. You can see Andy's tweet there. Further on it says, following publication of the report and subsequent coverage from conservative outlets like PJ Media, Lenihan faced a barrage of insulting remarks and attacks from Antifa-affiliated accounts. It's Going Down, a far-left publication dedicated to Antifa activism, identified Lenihan as the proprietor of the @ProgDadTV satirical Twitter account created years ago. And look at this picture from this tweet by It's Going Down. It's a screenshot of his YouTube, which it doesn't look exactly like that right now, but you do get this video clip.
Well, I follow quite a few people who have, I don't want to say they have hoax accounts, but they have parody accounts. And you know, a lot of people read into it wrong and think they're being honest and argue with them. Like there's this progressive dad guy on Instagram. You ever follow him?
I know exactly what you're talking about.
He's hilarious.
One I follow too. That's pretty funny.
It's like,
It seems Progressive Dad is not on BitChute as far as I could see, but I did see this. Progressive Dad is the best troll on the internet right now by Megan Fox for PJ Media. May 29th, Andy No tweeted this. We're going to have to move on in the interest of time. The Red State put out analysts who found journalists connected to Antifa now suspended by Twitter by Brandon Morse, in which they conclude the media's defense of Antifa is hardly a secret. However, CNN's Chris Cuomo has stood in favor of the violence practiced by Antifa because it's violence against people he disagrees with. He has done this more than once. And they give you a link so you can fact check that. Indeed, you can fact check everything I say here by seeing the webpage version of this video. The following day, May 30th, Billy D wrote for One Angry Gamer that Lenihan's, quote, article angered Antifa, and in result, they mass reported his account to get him suspended from the social media platform, unquote. At this point, you may be wondering, as I did, how do they actually know that? How do they know that he was mass reported by Antifa? But this writer does offer an explanation in the article, which we will come to. At any rate, further into the article he writes, many leftists and journalists continue to praise Antifa, even going so far as to celebrate their destructive behavior with things like game jams or publicly endorse their behavior on social media. Shortly after the Quillette article went up, the Antifa section of Twitter latched onto the news and proceeded to mass report Lenihan after they caught wind of an old parody account he operated called ProgDad TV. Since they couldn't attack Lenihan's argument, they decided to attack Lenihan directly. According to Human Events, Antifa did some deep diving into the researcher's Twitter history to discover his old parody account, attempting to smear him as a fascist and a racist. How predictable. The article concludes, the real telling part about this whole scenario isn't that Lenihan was suspended for what some might consider to be a quote-unquote banned evasion, but rather that when Antifa and the journalists' overlapping affiliations were broadcast to the public, Antifa immediately moved to have Lenihan censored. The so-called anti-fascists seemed quick to use tactics to silence dissent and stifle the speech of their opponents. Just like actual fascists. It really makes you think. Anyway, folks, it's a really good article. I encourage you to read the whole thing. May 31st. Breitbart published Twitter suspends researcher who exposed Antifa journalist connections by Alam Bokhari, in which they note Breitbart News has previously covered the mainstream media's sympathy for Antifa, see CNN's Antifa's violence against quote-unquote bigots is quote-unquote right, and New York Times glorifies Antifa with style guide, tactical advice, as well as the violent movement's allies in Silicon Valley, see Wikipedia editors seek to downplay Antifa violence and far-left ideology, and Demora lawsuit highlights Google's links to Antifa domestic terrorists. Libby Evans reported for the Post-Millennial that journalists that Lenihan, quote, identified as probably pro-Antifa, unquote, reached, quote, out to his other outlets and asked them to pull Lenihan's work, unquote. They also report that, quote, his video at Al Jazeera News on a completely unrelated topic has been pulled down and is pending review, unquote. If you don't already know, folks, as reported in this article, in 2018, before a hearing with the House Energy and Commerce Committee as reported by David Marcus at The Federalist, Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey revealed that, quote, his company's policies had in fact resulted in bias against conservatives, unquote. While at the time Dorsey claimed that this was unintentional, quote, the result of a faulty algorithm no longer in place, unquote, the truth is that over a year and a half since that hearing, the company has continued to not have any clear, discernible standard as to what should be banned and why. The article continues to report that after Lenihan's article about Antifa journalists, his account was targeted by Antifa activists such as Antifash Gordon. The revelation, presumably, that Lenihan's current handle had remained active while his former ProgDad TV handle had been silenced, was the reason that Lenihan was suspended. The later handle, however, was the first one created, which means that because it wasn't created as a workaround to the previous ban, Lenihan should have a shot at an account reinstatement. I want to call to your attention, folks, that in this article they include this really good interview with Lenihan about his motivations and whatnot behind his research, and I encourage you to read all that. This is the end of part 3. To make sure you see part 4, subscribe to us on BitChute. You can't rely on YouTube, so subscribe to us on BitChute. See that link below. Liberty, strength, honor, honesty, justice, truth, and love. Thanks for watching.